Let's talk about some of the bitiest Space Marines in the galaxy then. Time for a full in-depth review of Codex Space Wolves. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy-focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. In today's video we're going to go through each section of Codex Space Wolves, with a full review of each rule and section, and what I think is going to be the strongest for the Sons of Ross going forward. As per normal, Space Wolves are looking like quite a fun army to play on the table. Between this and their index, Thunderwolf Cavalry are now looking very strong indeed, and I'm really liking Wolfguard Terminators with their 3 wounds and very flexible wargear options. In this review we will be focusing on the match play rules. There's quite a lot of content for Crusade as well, which I'm not going to cover in depth as it would make the video much longer. In any case though, let's jump straight into it and talk some wolves. So Codex Supplement Space Wolves is now bringing the Space Wolves in line with the standard Codex Space Marines, and as books go from Games Workshop it isn't desperately expensive, and it's £17.50 from Games Workshop. As always though, with these supplements it'll certainly cost you more than before, seeing as you have to buy the Space Marine Codex to go with this. This isn't a standalone publication. In the book there's an extensive lore and background section, including some of the new Space Wolf successors which weren't a thing previously. There's a name generator and plenty of Crusade rules for narrative play, including the expected battle honours and pitfalls for your warriors. Their Super Doctrine Savage Fury makes a return, as do rules for playing as a Space Wolf successor chapter, which I think is really quite an interesting and powerful option, and I'll be hoping to discuss Space Wolf successors in a future video this week. In short though, getting +1 to charge for Space Wolves could be a really big deal. We then have the usual selection of stratagems, a couple of pages of them, Warlord traits and sagas to go with them, heavily redone this section and much better than previously, relics and special issue wargear, and a newly reimagined Tempestas Discipline with some really decent spells. There are 4 unique secondary objectives that you can choose for tournament missions, and a pretty hefty amount of datasheets, I believe something around 28 or so. These are pretty much the same as the index, but they have included those new Hounds of Morkai, their variant of the Reavers. The points for the datasheets are all listed in that very helpful new style as well, which makes for much less flicking back and forth between various tables. Savage Fury is still here and it's still very good. You get the Super Doctrine in the Assault Doctrine if your entire army is Space Wolves, though unaligned units don't count. Extra AP in the Assault Doctrine is already great for combat orientated wolves, and on top of that, every time you make an attack with a melee weapon, you'll get extra hits every time you roll a 6. The rule's actually strongest on harder to hit weapons, anything with a -1 to hit, such as a Power Fist, Chain Fist or Thunderhammer. Those weapons will have a higher proportionate damage increase compared with other ones that have no -1 to hit penalty. Between this and Hunters Unleashed, it means that Space Wolves are still very strong with Power Fists, Chain Fists and Thunderhammers. I thought we'd go for stratagems next, and this section's been very heavily rewritten, and what surprised me was just how many stratagems have disappeared since the index. I was honestly expecting anything that they'd reprinted in the index to still be here, but that is no longer the case. Touch of the Wild has disappeared, that's the one for extra hits on force when your characters are in combat. Vicious Executioners, the Wolfguard buff, both Death Grip Bite and Crushing Assault, 2 damage buffs to Thunderwolves, and I was quite sad to see Knowledge of the Foe go, the one where if you killed units with your characters, then they could eat some of their remains to get extra command points. Some of these were really quite short-lived, it hasn't been all that long since Saga of the Beast was released. For ones that remain however, for 2 command points we have Go for the Throat. This one is 2 CP, not 1 CP, sorry. This one gives you extra AP in the Assault Doctrine for every time that you roll a 6 to wound over your entire army. Frankly, it's okay. I think it's kind of less powerful than you might initially think. You would really need an absolute ton of units to be in combat with low AP weapons for it really to be worth it. Cunning of the Wolf for 1 command point allows the Space Wolf infantry unit to outflank. I'm sure that will still be very useful. Could be very solid with something like Aggressors or Blade Guard veterans, which are a couple of units that would really like to be turning up just next to the foe. The Emperor's Executioners is a 1 command point 1 where you reroll hits and wounds in melee versus Thousand Suns. Very fluffy but not very relevant against most opponents. Savage Strike is one of the best ones in this new book though. It either costs 1 or 2 command points, and it gives your Space Wolf unit a very nasty +1 to wound on the charge, 1 CP if it's 5 models or less, or 2 CP otherwise. I think this one's going to be a very common choice for Space Wolf units. You basically get to combine the best bits of being Space Wolves and Blood Angels all on your most powerful unit. As I'm sure most Blood Angel players will tell you, +1 to wound on the charge is an amazing ability. It's usually a very significant damage buff, and it's particularly good on anything with relatively low strength. Blade Guard veterans with Strength 5 Mastercrafted Power Swords will really love this. I can see this one being a new go-to. Next we have Healing Balms on the Wolf Priest, 1 command point to heal D3 wounds on a nearby infantry, cavalry or biker. Not particularly overwhelming. It's a bit sad that they don't get the combat revival thing that Apothecaries do. That would have been far stronger and really good with Thunderwolves. For 2 command points we have Pack Hunters, which you can use on any enemy unit already in melee with a Space Wolf unit. For the rest of your turn, Beasts and Cavalry will roll 3d6 charges and drop the lowest for determining their charge distance, so far more reliable charges, and you also get to reroll wound rolls with Thunderwolf Teeth attacks and Fenrisian Wolf attacks. I guess probably best worth it if you're really trying to get multiple units of Thunderwolves into a unit at the same time, but still 2 command points is worth it, and you might be just as well off with 1 command point to reroll the charge. Just a little bit pricey for me. Next up we have 1 command point for Relentless Assault. This is plus 3 inches to consolidate. A nice little trick to have in the bag. You could easily use this to tie up another enemy unit that wasn't expecting it. When it does make the difference between, say, a heavy weapon squad shooting or not in the next turn, it's going to be a really big deal. Cloaked by the Storm is 2 command points and remains a really quite powerful stratagem to keep your Space Wolves safe from enemy fire as they move up the board. When a Saga casts a Tempestas Discipline spell, you use this stratagem for 2 CP, and all Space Wolf units within 6 inches are going to be -1 to hit from shooting attacks in the opponent's next turn. Again, this one's really solid, and it's really going to blunt the damage output of enemy units shooting your army. If you combine this with a Stormcaller power, then you get light cover as well as -1 to hit, and the core of your army is just going to be so much harder to chew through. Again, I like this one a lot. Moving on, we have a Deed Worthy of Saga. This is 1 command point to gain any Saga ability when you accomplish the Deed of Legend associated with it. We'll get onto this more in the Warlord trait section, but this could be situationally very useful and one to keep in mind. An injured character can suddenly generate a 6+ Feel No Pain aura, which is pretty handy seeing as Space Wolves don't get Apothecaries. Next we have a couple of relic ones. A Trophy Bestowed is a standard Successor Chapter one to allow a Successor Chapter to get one of the standard relics. You can maybe use this to pick up the Armour of Russ or the Wulfen Stone even though you're a Successor Chapter. And Thane of the Retinue is a 1 command point 1 to give a Sergeant a relic. This can be a Mastercrafted weapon, digital weapons, frost weapon, or Morkai's Teeth bolts. Multiple strong options here. A Blade Guard Sergeant could make good use of a frost weapon, and I think the Morkai's Teeth bolts are a really good relic, so having them somewhere on your army is quite a good idea. Getting some nice reroll ones to wound against a target of your choice is no bad thing. Next up we have another fairly standard one. Warrior of Legend will allow you to take a second Warlord trait for your Warlord. A very powerful option indeed if you combine 2 fighty Warlord traits to make an absolute monster of a character. This one could be well worth it if you are going down some sort of Smash Captain pathway. Bestial Nature is really quite a useful one. 1 command point for any infantry, cavalry or biker unit to gain the Assault Doctrine. I believe that this one isn't going to give you Savage Fury, the Space Wolf's unique one, but will give you the extra AP. Extra AP when you need it's really quite nice. You could maybe combine that with the +1 to wound, and I think it'd be strongest on anything with low AP, in particular units like Reavers or Assault Intercessors could make some decent use of this. One of the stratagems that did survive from Saga of the Beast is Countercharge, now in a slightly new variant. With their new revamped chapter tactic, Space Wolves can all heroically intervene 3 inches, but with 1 command point they can heroically intervene 6 inches. It means your opponent's really going to have to stay away from them at all times, unless they want to be surprised in melee by a bunch of Thunderwolves or something. What's quite nice is that this is free on characters now, and it means that characters haven't really lost out all that much, despite no longer having the 6-inch heroic intervention as part of the chapter tactic. Next up we have Keen Senses, which will help out the Longfangs a bit. You ignore ballistic skill modifiers for that unit, and interestingly enough you now ignore any modifiers to the charge roll. It's maybe not quite as powerful as before 9th, when you could get multiple stacking ballistic skill modifiers, but still good in a pinch if you're playing against some tricksy Eldar with -1 to hit. The charge roll thing is a bit weird. Perhaps it could be handy if you're against something like a Repulsor, and it's going to give you -2 to charge with a stratagem. Last but not least, we have Runic Wards, a pretty handy little one for 1 command point, which allows you to make a Deny the Witch roll when a psychic power is cast within 12 inches. Quite short range, so a bit situational, and your opponent could easily avoid it if they need to, but when it does come up on a key psychic power, it could be very powerful indeed. Overall, my best picks from the stratagems are Savage Strike, because +1 to wound is amazing, and you can use it basically anywhere. Cloaked by the Storm for a nice -1 to hit as you move up. Warrior of Legend for the extra Warlord trait. Bestial Nature for the Assault Doctrine, and Countercharge whenever it comes up, because if you ever manage to surprise your opponent with a Thunderwolf heroic intervention, then it's going to be a bad time for them. Next up we come to the Warlord traits and Sagas. These have been quite extensively rewritten. Now the Warlord trait and the Saga are generally 2 different rules, though they often give fairly similar benefits. The Warlord trait is a buff to the Warlord themselves, and it's associated with a Saga. If they do the associated Deed of Legend, then that Saga always gives you a 6-inch aura that affects Space Wolf core units. Bear in mind as well, for characters that aren't your Warlord, you can still potentially activate one of these Sagas by doing a Deed of Legend. You just have to pay the 1 command point for that stratagem. First up we have Beast Slayer. This is +1 to hit, +1 to wound, and +1 attack against vehicles and monsters. Honestly, this is a really strong combat buff, though it does depend on your opponent having some of these targets for your Warlord to try and take out. Unsurprisingly, the Deed of Legend is to slay a vehicle or monster, which is at least relatively hard, but it gives you quite a powerful aura of a 6-inch aura of +1 to wound against vehicles or monsters in the fight phase. In general, a great one for a fighty character, though it is a bit specialised. Next we have Wulfen. This is +D3 attacks from Shock Assault, and this Shock Assault is always active for that character. On average, that's only going to amount to +1 attack compared with standard Shock Assault. It's an okay combat buff, but not really quite as good as the Imperium's sword in my opinion. The Deed of Legend is to slay any one model, which is very achievable, but the reward is to get an aura of Shock Assault always being active, and to be honest, Shock Assault usually is active unless you're in some sort of protracted combat. Probably not my favourite one this, I think it's overshadowed by other options. Saga of the Warrior Brawn is a little underwhelming. It allows you to fight first in melee. The Deed of Legend is hard to slay a character, but it gives you quite a good reward in an aura of fighting first for your nearby units. Again, often with Space Wolf melee you are going to be the one doing the charging, so you'll typically be fighting first anyway. Probably not my favourite of the bunch. Next we have Saga of the Hunter, which is one that's going to really get your character to the front lines quickly. You get +1 to advance and charge, and you can also charge if you either advanced or fell back. This one could be particularly potent on slower infantry related characters, as Thunderwolf mounted ones can already advance and charge, so they don't really gain much from that bit. It's quite funny for a Terminator armed character with this. He'd go from having an average charge threat range of 12 inches, all the way up to 17.5 inches when he can advance and charge, +1 to charge and +1 to advance. The Deed of Legend is very easy, just make a charge, and then you get an aura of advancing and charging for nearby Space Wolf core units, and anything with Hunters Unleashed can also fall back and charge as well. Again, not a bad one at all for a fighty tooled up character. You can maybe combine it with something like Beast Slayer or the Imperium's sword and have a character that's both very fighty and also gets there very quickly. Next we have the Aura of Majesty. This is a nice +3 inch to any of the reroll auras that characters get, such as Warlord or Battle Leader rerolls and any Chaplain or Wolf Priest abilities, including Litanies. Logan Grimnar gets this one, and it's pretty handy that his rerolls can go over quite a long distance, and in general I think it's really quite a powerful trait for some sort of character that's going to be doing buffing and giving rerolls. The Deed of Legend is to be in control of an objective that's greater than 6 inches away from your deployment zone, and it must be in charge of it at the start of your command phase. For that reward you get an aura of auto-passing morale for nearby units, which is a nice to have, particularly as Space Marines are a little bit more prone to running away than they were. Finally, and quite an interesting one, we have Resolve of the Bear. This one gives you a 6+ Feel No Pain type save, and your opponent can't reroll any wound or damage rolls against your character. I'd say it's fairly tame on its own, but the Deed of Legend is actually quite good. You just need to lose 1 wound but not die for it to happen, and then it gets you a 6+ Feel No Pain aura to all nearby core units. That one could actually drastically increase the survivability of nearby 2 wound Space Marines or things like Thunderwolves, Terminators or Blade Guard. I think that this one's really quite a good opportunistic one that you could just remember for your characters if they do ever take damage, and you can spend 1 command point to suddenly get them really quite a powerful defensive aura. For your actual Warlord though, the favourite of these traits for me are Beast Slayer for anti-vehicles, Hunter for getting your character to melee, and Aura of Majesty for providing some better buffs over a wider area. Next we come to Relics of the Fang, and now Space Wolves have successors in the rules. They're split into 2 tiers, the Relics and the Special Issue War Gear. Some of the Space Wolf relics are really quite good, the Armour of Rust being one of the best. It's got stronger since its previous iteration, giving you a 2+ save, a 4+ invul save, and one of the opponent's units in combat fights last. It's a really decent durability buff, but the fighting last is one of the best bits. It means that if your character can heroically intervene into an enemy unit, then you're pretty much guaranteed to hit them first with that character and whatever unit that your opponent might have happened to charge. It's a really powerful relic this one, and a good one to have in your battle line going forward. In particular, it could be powerful on a Rune Priest or Wolfguard Battle Leader, neither of which have a 2+ save or a 4+ invul. Next we have the Wulfen Stone, which is a bit changed. It gives you reroll charges to core units, and then once per game a unit that's taking the benefit of Savage Fury will get extra hits on 5s rather than 6s. The thing that I like the best about it is that nice aura of reroll charges. Space Wolves need as much reliability getting into combat as they can, and it can synergise quite nicely with units coming out of Deep Strike for some very reliable charges. I see the Savage Fury buff as a nice little extra. Typically it'll amount to something like a 20 to 25% increase in their damage. I'm afraid some of the rest just aren't quite as overwhelming to me. Fireheart is a slightly buffed plasma pistol, strength 8, AP -4, damage 3 and doesn't overheat. Not quite enough of a damage boost in my opinion. Black Death is an upgraded power axe, strength +2, AP -2, damage 1 and an extra d6 attacks. For me this just loses out to the Teeth of Terror which you can get in the core Space Marine Codex. Getting damage 2 on that is a much bigger deal. I've got a bit more time for the Mountain Breaker helm. After your character attacks, you get to roll a dice, and on a 2+, the unit that they attacked gets another d3 mortal wounds. It's actually a pretty significant buff to their damage output, and provided they wind up in melee, it will likely make itself useful. I'm not quite as big a fan of the Storm's Eye. This allows you to put a mortal wound on enemy units within 12 inches on the roll of a 4+ when you cast a Tempestas Discipline spell. It means you need to get really close, and it's only an unreliable chance to get a mortal wound on the roll of a 4. Again, not my favourite, I'm afraid. Finally, we have the Pelt of the Beowulf. This is actually really quite a powerful defensive buff, but it only applies in melee. It gives you -1 to hit and wound when you're in melee, but if your opponent just falls back and shoots you to death, then it's not doing you any good. If we move on to the special issue war gear, these are the ones that the successor chapters can take without restriction. We have the standard generic ones, Adamantium Mantle, digital weapons, mastercrafted weapon and artificer armour. Of these, my favourite as usual is the mastercrafted weapon. +1 damage on a Thunder Hammer or Power Fist is usually going to be a good choice for a fighty captain. I really quite like Morkai's Teeth Bolts as well. You just need to have a bolter weapon, and if you hit that unit then they're marked for death. All your Space Wolf units, including non-core ones, can reroll 1s to wound against them. Would actually be really nice combined with some heavy guns. Maybe you could have a Tech Marine mark a target for something like a Gladiator tank, give it +1 to hit, and you'll also get the reroll 1s to wound. The Wolftail Talisman gives you a 4+ Feel No Pain against Psychic Phase mortal wounds. Not good enough in my opinion. It's going to be pretty useless unless you know that you're facing a significant amount of Psychers. The Frost weapon was shown off by Warhammer Community. It's a fun twist on the Mastercrafted weapon, where a Power Sword, Mastercrafted Power Sword, Power Axe, Mastercrafted Power Axe, or Lightning Claws all get +1 strength and damage. This honestly looks really quite good for a character with Lightning Claws. You'll pretty much blend anything with a strength of 5, good AP, re-rolling wounds, and a damage of 2. It could be pretty good on a Mastercrafted Power Sword as well, such as the one that the Indomitus Lieutenant has. Hitting on strength 6, AP -3, and flat 3 damage is going to go through a lot of targets well. Finally, Runic Weapon gives you +1 to deny the witch tests, and +1 strength to a Rune Priest's Force weapon. To be honest, it's okay, but again it's only going to be of marginal use if you are guaranteed to be facing a bunch of Psychers. It's not really worth it in an all-comers list. Overall though, for Relics it's quite an impressive section in my mind. I really like the armour of Ross and the Wolfenstone. Both of those could have serious impacts on the game, and if you want to do a bit more damage, the Mountain Breaker Helm, Morkai's Teeth Bolts, Frost Weapon and Mastercrafted Weapons all seem like very solid options. Next up we have the Tempestas Discipline, which has seen a few changes and is a bit more powerful than before in my opinion. Living Lightning's a very solid alternative to Smite. It's Warp Charge 6, 18-inch range, and the closest unit takes d3 mortal wounds. Then on the roll of a 2+, it'll jump to do another mortal wound on another unit within 6 inches, and if you roll a 5+ for that roll, it gives them d3 mortal wounds instead. Not bad, particularly as you can combine it with Smite to just quickly throw out 2d3 mortal wounds with a chance for a few more on a nearby unit. Next there's Murderous Hurricane, which is a really solid supporting one to assault units. It's Warp Charge 6, and an enemy unit within 18 inches gets no overwatch, and it also has to fight last in the fight phase. Could be absolutely great against Tau, or if you're charging some sort of massive shooty death castle. And guaranteeing that your Space Wolves are going to get the first punch is really valuable against certain big Death Star melee units. Tempest Wrath is a nice simple debuff. An enemy unit within 24 inches gets -1 to hit. I think that's rarely going to be a wrong choice to take. Just debuff your opponent's most threatening unit. And I quite like the way that this one has a good long range, meaning that your Rune Priest doesn't have to get too close to that unit to be able to cast this spell. If you don't fancy paying a command points to get the Assault Doctrine early, then you can use Instincts Awoken. It's Warp Charge 6, and a unit within 18 inches gets the Assault Doctrine. Again, pretty excellent on any units with lower AP, things like Assault Intercessors or Reavers maybe. If you're already in the Assault Doctrine, then you just get extra AP on any rolls of 6s to wound. Not bad, but getting in the Assault Doctrine early is the real reason that I think you want to take this. Next we have Stormcaller. This one's Warp Charge 6, and frankly it's really quite a powerful option, granting light cover to any Space Wolf units within 6 inches, whether or not they're core. I really like the idea of this for a Space Wolf advance. You could be running up the board with a bunch of Bloodclaws, Grey Hunters, or even Wolfguard Terminators perhaps. Get them all in cover, so a 2+ save or better, and then also combine that with a 2 command point stratagem to make them all -1 to hit. You'll be losing significantly fewer Space Wolves to enemy fire. Finally, we have Jaws of the World Wolf. This one's warp charge 7 and is 18 inches. You roll a dice for each model in the unit, and on the roll of a 6+, they take a mortal wound, and if you rolled a high casting value of 9 or more, then those mortal wounds happen on 5s instead. This one's probably my least favourite of the entire discipline, to be honest. It's higher warp charge, and it's only really going to be effective against big blobs of units, things with 10 models or more. I personally leave it at home for one of the other options. Out of these, I'm honestly very impressed. Besides Jaws, I think that all the rest of the other 5 are very usable indeed. You could decently support some melee units with Murderous Hurricane for no overwatch and granting the Assault Doctrine with Instincts Awoken. You could protect your Space Wolves by using Tempest Wrath and Stormcaller, or you could just throw out a ton of mortal wounds by combining Living Lightning with Smite. It seems like a pretty good time to be a Rune Priest to me. Next up we have 4 unique secondary objectives for Space Wolves. Again, different options that you can pick instead of some of the standard mission objectives. Glory Kills gives you command points for killing both monsters and characters. It's 2 victory points for killing a character in each battle round, or 3 victory points for killing a monster. If you don't kill one of these, then you get 1 victory point for inflicting 3 wounds on either type. Seems like a very good choice if your opponent has plenty of these about. Next we have Heroic Challenge, where both players must choose a character, and your Space Wolves have to kind of hunt him to death. You get 5 victory points at the end of the game, 5 more if he's killed in melee, and 5 more if it's at the hand of your character. Quite a lot of counterplay to this one, to be honest. Your opponent can choose whichever character they like, and then they can keep that character very safe at the back of their army to try and deny you any points whatsoever. I say not the most reliable, unless you're pretty certain that you're going to table your opponent, in which case you're probably not going to have trouble with some of the other secondaries. Next, under the No Mercy, No Respite category, we have a Mighty Saga. This one's all about your Warlord going around the board and doing fun things. At the end of each turn, they get 2 victory points for each one of these actions they manage to do, including damaging vehicles, killing characters, killing 5 or more models in one turn, or controlling objectives in the enemy deployment zone. While it's quite good fun and fluffy, I feel like you're taking a massive gamble by taking this one. If your Warlord gets shot down sometime early in the game, then you lose your entire secondary. They might also run out of targets or ways that they can do this for various different reasons, so I'm not sure it's the strongest. Finally, Warrior Pride looks a bit better as a potential pick. Per turn you get 3 victory points if you have at least 2 Space Wolf units either within engagement range of an enemy model or have made some successful charges this turn. To be honest, playing Space Wolves you're quite likely to want to be making charges all the time, so this should be a fairly easy one to get multiple turns of this active. Unless you're doing things like drop pods or your opponent comes towards you a lot though, then it's going to be hard to achieve in turn 1. And you might also struggle later in the game when things might be winding down a bit and either you or your opponent might not have many units left to charge or be charged. Out of these, I would say that Warrior Pride is probably the strongest though Glory Kills or Heroic Challenge could be very useful if you're fighting the right army. Next up we come on to the many Space Wolf datasheets. I believe there's 28 datasheets in the Codex, most of which have stayed exactly the same from the Index, but there are a few exceptions. In the Index they gave us some special rules for the units. Swift Hunters is a new rule for any of the Wolf-based units, Thunderwolves, characters mounted on Thunderwolves, or Fenrisian and Cyberwolves. This just plain and simple allows them to advance and charge, and it's a massive boon to them, being able to get across the board very quickly and into glorious melee. Between this and an extra wound, Thunderwolves are going to be far more scary on the table. They also detail Berserk Charge and Headstrong, which is for Bloodclaw units. Basically they get an extra attack on the charge, but must make a charge unless they have a Wolfguard pack leader present, and following that we're into the datasheets themselves. As I said, they're largely unchanged from Codex Space Wolves, so we'll just go through a few of the highlights from them, starting with the Hounds of Morkai and the changes to the Thunderwolves and Wulfen. First up we have the Hounds of Morkai, the new datasheet for the Codex. They're power level 5, just the same as Reavers, but are unfortunately just a bit more expensive at 22 points per model. They can't take the bolt carbine that Reavers can, but they do get the special issue bolt pistol and combat knife, and they're locked into taking grapnel launchers. These guys are essentially anti-Psyker Reavers, and they have 3 different rules for hunting Psykers, which give you all sorts of different things. Firstly, they ignore Lookout Sir, so they can directly target them with pistols and things. They get +1 to hit and +1 damage whenever they're targeting a Psyker, and that's both at range and in melee. They get a 4+ Feel No Pain type save against psychic spells. They can only be targeted if they're the closest unit to the Psyker by psychic spells, and they also, and perhaps most importantly, give a -1 to cast within 18 inches, or -2 to cast if they're within 6 inches of the Psyker. To be honest, for all their damage dealing rules, I think that one's possibly the most useful. I guess you could just sort of see them as paying a little bit over the odds compared with a standard squad of Space Marines to have a powerful anti-Psyker rule in play in the matchups where it's going to make a difference. Again though, being quite so specialised, they're not really much of a take-all-comers sort of unit, and I suspect that they'll see more play the more psychic-heavy armies that we see in the game. For Thunderwolves and Wulfen, the story is very similar to the Index. If you haven't already caught up with those rules, then basically Thunderwolves got massively better compared with Wulfen, which were the more competitive choice in 8th edition. Wulfen have dropped a little in points, going from 28 points to 25, the Thunderhammer and Storm Shield is now 41 from 48, and the Great Frost Axe is down to 33 from 38. They did gain Toughness 5, but they lost their 5+ Feel No Pain type save, and now with the changes to Storm Shields, it'll generally mean that their Storm Shield options are generally saving on a 4+ rather than a 3+. Death Frenzy was also nerfed. You can only attack now if you hadn't already fought that fight phase, so no more double attacking Wulfen. They gained a Bestial Rage special rule, meaning they can't perform any actions, which is a little bit unfortunate. They don't have Core, which means you can't buff them with characters. And for buffs that they provide to other units, they now only grant reroll charges. They don't give extra attacks as they did before when you were in a protracted combat. Finally, and perhaps most unfortunately, they can no longer advance and charge, meaning that they're going to be far slower than Thunderwolves, where they were arguably faster before. So multiple and varied nerfs there. They did get one additional benefit though, which is Savage Fury. Shock Assault is always active for them, and the Assault Doctrine is always active as well, so they will get a bit of extra AP. In general, barring any character support, they'll be hitting just as hard as they did previously in the first round of combat, and that is very hard indeed, and arguably might be a bit better in terms of damage output, seeing as they went down in cost. However, they're just far easier to kill, they're really not all that tough point for point, and they're a lot more of a fragile glass hammer type of unit, rather than one that's just going to sit there and take a beating while giving it out. Thunderwolves, on the other hand, really do seem to be stepping up to the plate, and things have only really got better for them. Getting advance and charge from Swift Hunters means they're actually legitimately fast threats, which they weren't previously, and each rider went up to 4 wounds as well, all while their points cost remaining unchanged. Their wolf attacks are a little bit better, getting AP -2. The Storm Shield for just 5 points is a really good deal, a 2+ save and 4+ invul is great on a 4 wound model, and some of their melee weapons have also got some of the improvements from Codex Space Marines, such as Lightning Claws granting an additional attack, and Chainsaws being -1. As if that weren't enough to cement some advantages, they also do have the core keyword, so riding them up alongside a couple of buffing characters is a pretty reasonable idea. Overall, they're looking like a very scary unit for Space Wolves, and we might have to talk about them a bit more in another video. In terms of the other units, not all that much has changed. 3 wound Wolfguard Terminators are really flexible, you can really tailor this unit to exactly how you want, and it's quite nice that they can combine Storm Shields with other options. You could go for some crazy Storm Shield Lightning Claw Terminators, or Power Fist or Chain Fist combined with Storm Shields. They're honestly looking really solid, I think they will be fielded a lot in the new edition. The Power Armoured units are all 2 wounds. Grey Hunters are 18 points with a Starty's Chainsword costing you 1 extra. Both them and Bloodclaws seem like really solid alternatives to Assault Intercessors. Wolfguard are also great, similar to Vanguard Veterans in Codex Space Marines, and even more flexible, allowing you to mix some ranged gear in with Storm Shields and things, should you see fit. Longfangs aren't really anywhere near as unique as they were. They don't get their special reroll now, they're essentially pretty much a Devastator squad that can take a Wolfguard pack leader. It does mean that they gained access to Armorium Cherubs and Graph Cannons though, both of which are good things. Fenrisian Wolves and Cyber Wolves are both very cheap. They did gain Swift Hunters, so that's a bit better for them, but other than being a cheap distracting screen, I still don't think they're going to be very worth it. I certainly wouldn't be fielding them en masse. Vehicles wise, Bjorn is still looking great. You no longer get the 1 command point bonus for fielding him, but he gained Duty Eternal, so he's far tougher than previously. His Hellfrost Cannon is buffed if you take it. He retains his Feel No Pain type save and the reroll aura, and he can also stack that with Wisdom of the Ancients to give you reroll 1s to hit and wound. He also went down in cost very slightly. He'll cost you between 175 and 195 points now, and frankly he's a really good pick. Murderfang on the other hand went up a bit, still very killy, but gained Bestial Rage for no actions. The Wulfen Dreadnought's quite cheap, 120 points, and he's cheaper with a Blizzard Shield than he was previously, and the Great Frost Axe is now damage D3 plus 3, so again turning up the level of murder just a little bit. Unfortunately it's really not very good news for the Flyers though, they both got far more expensive, particularly the Stormfang, and losing that Storm Strike Stratagem from the Saga of the Beast really does make this thing not very efficient anymore. The 2 sets of twin multi-melters became melter arrays, and they get D3 multi-melter shots rather than flat 4 as you might expect. The Hellfrost Cannon was buffed, there is a mode to get a flat 6 damage out of it, but honestly I don't think it's enough for greater than 300 points. Space Wolves are famed for their characters, and they have 10 unique ones and 3 generic characters. Lugan Grimnar is pretty fighty at the moment. His axe can be used one-handed or two-handed. One-handed now doubles your attacks, when the two-handed profile no longer has -1 to hit, so a fair bit more fighty. He does get the new Chapter Master wording though, which means his rerolls are just for one unit rather than for everyone. On Storm Rider, he now has 14 wounds, up from 12. He gains Swift Hunters for advancing and charging very quickly, but he lost his innate rerolling to charge. He's a chariot and not a vehicle now, which means that you can't repair him with Tech Marines, and his wolf attacks got slightly buffed as well. They get 6 attacks base now, and they're all AP -2. Overall, I think he's far more threatening than previously, though he still might just die before he gets to melee if your opponent focuses him down. Arjak just isn't as good as he was before. He's 120 points, and his foe hammer now is flat 3 damage and AP -3, with damage 4 against characters and monsters. That is very good, but he lost one of his most powerful aura buffs, which was giving the extra attack to Wolfguard units. I still think he's not a bad option for a Wolfguard battle leader if you want one, but I don't think he stands out from the crowd quite as much as before. As for the others, Ragnar is generally unchanged, though unfortunately Touch of the Wild is gone. Nyar Stormcrawler is only in his Terminator armour now, he doesn't get his Runic armour version, and the Staff of the Stormcrawler is very slightly more hitty, it's now Strength 7. Ulrich is able to auto-pass litanies if he killed a character or monster in the game, and his Crozius is Strength 6, AP -2, Damage 2, so a bit better than standard. Canis and Harold, the Thunderwolf characters, both gain Swift Hunters, and their wolf attacks are all AP -2 now, and Canis' Wolf Claws also gain Strength 5, Damage 2 now, so they're pretty much good against everything. Harold is largely unchanged, but his Mantle of the Troll King is now -1 damage now, rather than its previous ruling. Last but not least, Lucas the Trickster is looking like quite a fun little character to include now. He's 85 points, went up to 5 attacks, and is actually really quite a potent buffing character, giving full hit rerolls to any Blood Claws, Sky Claws or Swift Claws in melee within 6 inches. I think he's looking far more playable than previously. So overall, I'd say it's a fairly good update for Space Wolves. I do feel though that there have been some trade-offs, some powerful stratagems have been lost, and Wulfen are far worse than they were before. However, I think that the Tempestas Discipline is a lot better. Being able to access the Assault Doctrine and +1 to wound on the charge just for a command point each are great, and Thunderwolves, Wolfguard Terminators and standard Wolfguard units are all looking like incredibly viable picks. So let me know what you think of the new rules down in the comments below. I'll certainly be hoping to do a few more Space Wolf videos over the next week or so, in particular focusing on successor chapters and then having a look at the Thunderwolves. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see those. Finally, if you have enjoyed this video, I'd just like to mention that the channel has a Patreon page, which you can find down in the video description. Making all of these videos does take an extremely long amount of time, particularly big Codex reviews like this. They take the best part of a day. If you are enjoying regularly or are getting good value out of the videos, then any support with keeping them coming is massively appreciated. Channel patrons do get a few advantages that other people don't. You get to see certain new videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the Auspex Tactics prize giveaway, which happens at the start of each month. If any of those sound good to you, or you'd just like to help keep these videos coming, then feel free to check out the link that is down in the video description. In any case, thanks very much for listening, and go forth and make Russ proud.